in Hebrew is our letter B, is beta in Greek. And resh in Hebrew is our letter R, is the Greek letter rho. And it's completely parallel through the text, through all of the alphabet. And that's because they use these alphabets as counting systems. And they're all out in the same alphabetical order, and A was always 1, and B was always 2. And you counted through the alphabet, and you have this numerological gematria system, which most people think that's what's going on in the Kabbalistic material. It's just a bunch of number mysticism. Well, that wasn't very convincing to me. And I looked and looked and looked at this first verse, and I couldn't figure out what to do with it. But I kept remembering what Suarez had said. And I read other places also. And the idea is that the secret of the universe is supposed to be in the first letter. But if you're not bright enough to figure it out from the first letter, God in his infinite mercy repeats it in greater detail in the first word. If you can't figure it out from the first word, oh, well, don't worry. God repeats it in the first verse. It's a description of a hierarchical array. Now, I don't know about you, but it wasn't obvious to me right off that that letter, how that meant the secret of the universe. That just didn't do it for me. And the first word, that would have been nice, except I didn't know what the first word was. I mean, it's fine. Most people translate that first word, that is the first word, bereshit. It means in, and the word rosh, resh, and head refers to the head. The word in Hebrew means a head. And so it means in, at the head of, in the beginning. But there's no reason to take that as the first word. These weren't the letters weren't broken up into words. Here's another sequence of B, R, and A, just like here. Except this sequence is translated, he created. And this little three-letter sequence has a meaning. It means, for instance, 6, or it means a thorn. And it means many other things, too. There's actually over 900 official Talmudic translations to the first verse alone. So there's a little flexibility in the meaning here. But it seemed to me that I didn't know what the first word was. Now, the first verse, that I could look at. It was long enough for me to play with, short enough for me to look at, long enough to have enough information, and the first word of the next verse repeats the last word of the first verse. So even if this wasn't a natural unit, there's a fold point here. There's a reason to believe that I can stop at this point and examine. What am I going to examine? Not much you can do with that. Well, over the 10 years, I had drawn up a set of criteria of what I was looking for if there was going to be anything and if it was going to be findable. And I made a simple analogy with something that was current at the time I was doing this. It must be about 15 years ago now that the folks at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory decided to send a message into outer space by the radio telescope in Arecibo, Puerto Rico. And they devised a binary code that made a little black and white TV picture of a man and the elements of life and a little picture of DNA and of the solar system. It was a black and white TV picture. And the reason they did that is because they deduced that folks living on Alpha Centauri or other star systems someplace in the universe who might receive our message weren't likely to speak English or Sanskrit or Swahili or any other Earth language. That whatever message they were going to send over several thousand years of space-time had to be in some kind of a universal form. It had to be decipherable by whoever got it, no matter what their idea of language was. And the key for breaking into it had to be given, had to be there right up front, had to be very obvious. And so they designed in their little TV picture the kind of qualities they thought would enable someone to independently rediscover their TV picture. Well, it occurred to me that 2,000 years of space-time is hardly any different than 2,000 years of Earth time. That over a course of 2,000 or 3,000 years, which is the supposed history of these texts, language becomes dead, becomes lost. Meanings change. It's hard for us to read Shakespearean English at this point. We can still do it, but it's difficult. Hebrew became a dead language during the Babylonian exile and was only reconstituted by Ezra at about 500 BC. The Hebrew that Israelis speak today was made up about 100 years ago by a guy named Yehuda Ben Yehuda. I forget his first name. So that there wasn't any necessary link between what happened 3,000 years ago and now. And besides, the people 3,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, if they had something of extreme importance that they wanted to preserve, they couldn't assume that their language would survive. So if there was something recoverable, and it was really important, and the people who knew it or had it at the time wanted it to be recoverable, they would have had to have provided for it to be self-decoding. And that was one of my original criteria. There had to be a key, a crypto marker, a way to break into the system, if there was a system, and it had to be throughout the text, and it had to be especially at the beginning. The beginning might not survive, so you have to have it throughout the text as well. Well, I decided to look for such a way to break into the system. It took me several years. I didn't know what to do. But I did hear another legend, which was very interesting. I've got it up on top here. The Hebrew alphabet that Ezra came up with is this alphabet up on top, so-called Meruba, square form, Aramaic style alphabet. It has 27 letters in groups, 3 groups of 9. But Ezra did something, at least Ezra was supposed to have done something. According to the rabbinic tradition, he restored the original form of the letters. According to the academic scholars, he adopted the Aramaic letters and added 5 letters at the end of the alphabet, which are final forms of earlier letters. If you want to make an M in the middle of the alphabet, you draw it that way. If it's the last letter of a word, you draw it that way. Well, if you start to insert final letters into the text, you start to define word divisions all of a sudden. So you start to be able to break the text up. And the thing about this alphabet is, as the Christians have taught, and as the Jews teach, and I don't know if Muslims teach the same thing, to change a jot or a tittle of these sacred texts would be disastrous, would be a terrible heresy, might mean the end of the world. If the Torah is, as the Jews teach, the template of creation, the pattern that God looked into to create the world, if you change a letter, then you change the creation. And so rabbis who believe this certainly weren't going to change any letters. But on the other hand, we're told that Ezra changed the whole alphabet from the Canaanite alphabet and added 5 final letter forms and rewrote all of the texts. Slightly inconsistent story. Well, the important part is that the 27 letters is not an arbitrary number of letters. It's an explicit number. And it finally dawned on me that the first verse of Genesis had a string of 27 letters followed by the 27th letter. 28 letters altogether. 27 letters, the 27th letter, and a 27-letter alphabet that comes along with it. 3 statements of 27. And 27 is 3 cubed. I said to myself, gee, I wonder what would happen if I counted the letters out in base 3, by 3s. Well, I ultimately tried other bases also, but when I counted by 3s, interesting things started to happen. And what I did is I simply started with the aleph as 0, not as 1 like the numerologists do, because I'm going to be looking at a geometric system, not a system of arithmetic. And the first count geometrically is the origin, the reference point. And the aleph, as you can see, is a funny shape. It has this diagonal swath down the middle. And as I realized later, an aleph is really nothing but the head and tail of the snake that eats its tail, the Ouroboros, which is another name for the Hebrew alphabet. If you connect the second letter to the last letter upside down as if it came around under it, then you have a little aleph. And so another reason for considering it to be the splice point, the odd letter, the 0 count. And so I count from 0 to 26, and I count by 3s. 0, 1, 2, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 0, 2, 1, 2, 2. It's just like counting by 2s or by 10s as we normally do. After you get up to 2, you have to carry, because in base 3, 3 is the base, that's the power that you carry by. When you do that, you get a little digit, a little number associated with each letter, which is really nothing but its position in the alphabet. In other words, this letter, K, says the 10th letter, starting with aleph is 0, and 10 in base 3 is written 1, 0, 1. Very simple. Well, and then finally, again, after many months of staring off into space, it occurred to me that I could use those same little numbers that are the position of the letters in the alphabet and consider them to be Cartesian coordinates. And so I ended up putting the letters of the alphabet on this nice little model that Dr. Rubik was kind enough to make for us all. And they're simply in the same order as it says there. If the letter is say, the letter H, 021, I took that to be at the location on an x, y, z coordinate system to 0, 2, 1. X equals 0, y equals 2, z equals 1. And so I'm out over here. And so every letter gets a location given by its Cartesian coordinate, given by its letter count, its position.